In the bustling brothel of Athens, a night with a woman could cost no more than 2 barley flatbreads or even less than a jug of cheap wine. These women called porni were at the bottom tier of prostitution, a term that reduced them to mere objects of chatter and transaction. Court speeches by figures like Dio and Lysis suggest that porni often served 6 to 10 men a day, earning barely enough to buy a small portion of lentils. Meanwhile, the brothel owners grew rich with part of their earnings flowing directly into the city's treasury through taxes. Athenian law imposed no minimum age for entering prostitution. Archaeological evidence and historical records reveal that girls as young as 10 to 13 were exploited in these establishments. Each enslaved girl bore a permanent brand on her thigh, burned into her skin with hot iron, marking her as living property. Life inside these houses was brutally harsh. If a girl refused to work, she could expect horrific punishment, public whippings, starvation for days, or worse. The arrival of a new girl was marked by a particularly cruel ritual, and she would be assaulted in full view of other women and regular patrons. An account from a man named Papi of Thessaly claimed this was deliberately done to crush her spirit and extinguish any hope of escape. Onlookers often jeered and laughed, turning the suffering into public amusement. A newly arrived girl was far more valuable than one who had been in the trade for long. Men would pay 10 times the usual price to be with someone untouched by previous harm. Writers of the time described such transactions casually, as if purchasing fresh fruit from a stall. Privacy did not exist. Women worked in corners of large rooms separated only by filthy cloth or mats. Every cry of pain was part of the background noise, a form of entertainment for men waiting their turn. Before we uncover more of these buried stories of pain and resilience, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to share the voices of those who were silenced in life. Owners of these women often sorted them into disturbing categories. Nubian women, exceptionally short women, those who could not speak, women who fought back, and those still considered unbroken. Each group came with its own price tag and its own clientele. 5th century art even depicts competitions in which men would attempt to overpower a resisting woman purely for amusement. Graffiti found on brothel walls shows that some customers paid extra for the privilege of inflicting severe harms, slashing faces, leaving scars, or permanently maiming them. Violence was marketed like any other commodity. Some women were advertised specifically for punishment. Split lips, shattered teeth, burns from tipped oil lamps. These were injuries that certain men sought out deliberately. To them, a woman's agony became a form of art. Her screams a drunken melody. In the same city that celebrated philosophy and drama, cruelty against women proved to be one of the most lucrative trades. Yet even the daily brutality palled in comparison to what occurred during religious festivals. During certain celebrations, especially the festival of Dionia, prostitutes were handed over to groups of men for free as part of what was framed as a sacred ritual. Surviving accounts describe these scenes without a hint of shame. Groups of intoxicated men assaulting women while music played, wine flowed, and bets were placed on how long the victim could endure. On these days, a woman's last shred of dignity vanished. She became nothing more than a plaything for the crowd. Medical notes from the period record deaths from internal injuries, suffocation, and massive blood loss. Priests claimed such acts honored the gods. Wine and the blood of abused women mingled on the altar, their dying breaths reframed as prayers for abundant harvests. When the festivals ended, those still breathing were dragged back to the brothel to resume work. The dead were discarded beyond the city walls, their bodies thrown into ravines like refuse. These ritual atrocities were simply an extension of the violence women endured daily. Constant beatings with sticks, leather straps, or bare fists. Loyal patrons were sometimes allowed to participate in the punishments, inventing cruel games at the women's expense for even the smallest mistake, spilling a drop of wine, mispronouncing a customer's name, or simply allowing herself to cry. A woman in an Athenian brothel could find herself locked in a pitch-black room without food or water for days. Sometimes the punishment was even more cruel. She might be tied to a stone post in the open courtyard, left shivering in drenched clothing through the freezing winter nights, or sweltering under the burning summer sun without a single drop to drink. This was cynically referred to by the owners as character correction. Objects at hand, wooden clubs, heavy wine cups, even the blunt ends of knives were used as instruments of discipline when a woman disobeyed. Over time, the women learned to mask their agony behind forced smiles because tears or screams only provoked their masters into further violence. In a city that praised the perfection of the human form in art and sculpture, the bodies of these women became living canvases of bruises, burns, and scars. If a woman dared to escape, the law treated it not as a plea for freedom, but as an act of theft, stealing property from her owner. The penalties were vicious and public. Runaways were often branded with searing hot metal on the forehead or chest, marking them forever as deserters. Court records reveal even grimmer fates. Some captured women were nailed to wooden boards and displayed in the city square as a warning to others. Death from thirst or from festering infections around the nail wounds was common. Some desperate women sought sanctuary in temples, throwing themselves before the altars in hopes that the gods would shield them. But the priests, often swayed by bribes, handed them back to their owners for a small payment. Property rights outweighed divine mercy. Runaways were dragged away in chains, their blood staining the temple steps, stains that were scrubbed away by other slaves at dawn. Each failed escape attempt only brought harsher retribution. Athenian justice had endless methods for breaking a woman's will while still keeping her useful for work. Yet even that usefulness meant little when the market for new women was so cheap. Medical writings from the period note that few of these women lived past their mid-20s. The causes of death were as relentless as the work itself. Sexually transmitted diseases, infections from untreated wounds, complete exhaustion, and the cumulative toll of malnutrition and repeated abuse. Those with festering injuries, foul-smelling discharges, or open sores were not removed from service. Instead, they were forced to keep working until they physically collapsed. Owners considered medical treatment a waste of money. A new girl cost less than a physician's visit. Complaints from customers about the stench of rotting flesh and blood were met with beatings as though pain could miraculously restore dying tissue. Archaeological digs near the ruins of Old Brothel have uncovered chilling evidence. Female skeletons with severe pelvic damage from forced intercourse and childbirth, skulls cracked from blunt force, ribs that had been broken and healed improperly, and spinal deformities caused by years of strain. All these bones stand a silent testimony to a life of systematic violence. When a woman became too sick to earn, she was discarded without ceremony, carried beyond the city walls and abandoned whether she was breathing or not. In Athens, the same city that set ideals for beauty and proportion, women's bodies were thrown away like shattered pottery. Pregnancy was viewed not as a natural event, but as damage to valuable property. The punishment for it was swift and cruel. To prevent births, owners forced women to drink poisonous brews, struck them in the abdomen, or made them lift impossibly heavy loads until they miscarried. Ancient medical notes detail horrifying abortion practices, herbs that caused violent illness, boiling oil poured into the womb, or sharpened wooden sticks pushed inside. If pregnancy could not be stopped, the birth took place on the same filthy straw mat where customers were entertained. There were no midwives, no medicines, no sanitation. Many women bled to death or died from fever in the days after delivery. Archaeologists have uncovered tiny bones in drainage channels and rubbish heaps behind ancient brothel. Infant remains discarded without care. The killing of newborns was routine, especially girls or children fathered by slaves. For many women, ending their child's life was seen as the only act of mercy they could give, sparing them the same fate they endured. Under Athenian law, these women had no standing as human beings. Their bodies and labor belonged entirely to their owners. They were forced to work under the weight of fabricated debts for food, clothing, and shelter, debts that grew daily with interest and arbitrary fines. Refusal of a client, even one known for violence or dangerous demands, was impossible. Consent was a concept. The law denied them entirely. Court documents from the era tell of women who tried to seek justice for mistreatment, but the system was stacked against them. A slave's word could not be used against a free man unless the woman was tortured first to verify her truthfulness. In the society that invented democracy, half the population, its women were excluded from it entirely, and enslaved women occupied the very lowest rung, valued less than livestock, which at least were fed and sheltered regularly. And yet, on the rarest of occasions, a woman might catch a glimpse of something more, a possibility, however faint, to rise slightly above the misery. Sometimes it came through the favor of a wealthy patron who purchased her freedom, or through an owner who found profit in training her as a musician or dancer for higher-class entertainment. But for the vast majority, those moments never came, and the cycle of exploitation continued without mercy. Sometimes a woman might rise above the common ranks by becoming the favorite of her master or a wealthy patron. In such cases, she could be granted a private room adorned with fine jewelry, dressed in silks instead of coarse wool, and constantly attended to. Yet, these so-called privileges were nothing more than the trappings of a gilded cage. Favorites understood that their position was fragile, entirely dependent on the shifting whims of a man who could, without warning, send them back to the crowded common brothel, or even have them killed for the smallest act of disobedience. Historical records reveal that these favored women were often treated as tokens of hospitality. A master might offer one of his mistresses to a visiting friend for the night, returning her the next morning as though she were a fine wine cup briefly loaned to a dear companion. Even at the highest rung of this grim hierarchy, a woman was still just property, her body, an object, her value measured in coin. Golden chains held her as firmly as iron shackles. But beauty and youth never lasted. Whether a woman had been a streetel slave or a cherished mistress, age eventually stripped away her worth in the eyes of those who owned her. The end was always the same, a nameless death followed by deliberate erasure. These women were denied the dignity of proper Greekarary rights. Their bodies were dragged beyond the city limits and abandoned in ravines or shallow, unmarked graves. Against sacred custom, they were denied tombstones, inscriptions, or offerings. Even in the rare case that a woman achieved her freedom, the stain of her past rendered her untouchable in respectable society. Former prostitutes were excluded from civic life, becoming living ghosts, present, but erased, as though they had never truly existed. Archaeologists have uncovered female remains mingled with discarded pottery shards and heaps of household refuse. Stark proof of a final resting place that reflected their perceived worth less than human. No grave markers, no names, no memory. In a culture that immortalized its warriors and kings in epic verse, the lives of these women vanished without a trace. Their suffering was too common to be preserved in poetry. Yet the cruelty extended beyond forgetting. It was woven into entertainment. Comic playwrights such as Aristophanes depicted prostitutes as crude, lustful, and worthy only of mockery or violence. In Athenian theaters, crowds roared with laughter at stage scenes of rape, beatings, and public humiliation. The pain of women was served up as comedy. In homes, painted pottery displayed scenes of gang assaults, torture, and other acts of cruelty, decorating wine cups and dining vessels. Violence against women became a motif of domestic art, so normalized, it blended into the fabric of everyday life. Poets sometimes celebrated the elegance of high-class courtesans, but women from brothel appeared in verse only as objects of ridicule. Their cries of pain were twisted into rhymes, their tears reduced to metaphors for rain or morning dew. In a society that elevated tragic theater into a form of high art, the true tragedies endured by living women were transformed into jokes. Athenian culture perfected the skill of turning away from the suffering of those it deemed undeserving of compassion, a willful blindness that allowed its economy to thrive on the exploitation of the powerless. Brothel paid steady taxes into the city's treasury, and the buying and selling of women was a lucrative business. Democracy flourished in a society where half the population lived in bondage, and women were shut out of political life entirely. While Socrates debated the meaning of virtue in the public square, just a few streets away, hundreds of women were being traded as human commodities. While Pericles spoke of Athens' noble spirit, the city enriched itself through organized human trafficking. The marble of the Parthenon, the grandeur of its temples, the stages of its theaters, all were supported by the profits of an economy that consumed the lives of women. The splendor of Athens was financed in part by the blood and bodies of slaves whose names history chose not to remember. Modern accounts of ancient Greece, whether in school books or tourist guides, often gloss over this reality. The dark underbelly of the classical world is sanitized or emitted as though acknowledging it might tarnish the glory of antiquity. The tens of thousands of women who endured this life remain absent from the official story, their pain erased from the narrative. Yet their absence is not silence. In the ruins of Athens, their shadows still linger. The unmarked graves, the fragments of pottery bearing their images, the faint traces of graffiti in ancient brothel, all whisper the same truth. Their story deserves to be told. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you found this content meaningful, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback and honest opinions help us bring more of these hidden histories to